Okay, the next thing we're going to be learning about is we're moving on from fractions. Sort of. We're still going to be talking about fractions, just in a different way. So what I mean by that is, if we look at this, I think we all know what we can call this. We can call it a square. But, of course, in fraction terms, we're going to call it just a one whole. So, again, we can call this a square or a one whole. But, of course, in fraction terms, we're going to be talking about it as one whole. Okay? Now, with fractions, we have learned that if we take a whole and we split it up into different pieces, smaller pieces, then it becomes a fraction. So, for instance, we can take a square and split it up into fourths, and then if we use 3 of those fourths, then we're talking about 3/4. And the difficult thing about fractions is that, it can be... Alright, so like I said, the difficult thing about fractions is that it can be anything. So, if we look at it, we can turn this whole into any fraction. We can do fifths. And if I color those in, now we have 2/5 and anything like that. Now, what we're going to learn is different things to call this. There's different ways to talk about fractions, and they are called decimals. Now, basically all decimals are is just another word for fractions. So, if we have, again, what makes decimals easier is that you're only dealing with 2 types of fractions. You're only going to be dealing with tenths and hundredths. Like I said, with fractions, they can be anything. They can be thirds, fifths, 13ths, 75ths, anything like that. But decimals only deal with tenths and hundredths, which I think makes them a lot easier to deal with. So let me show you what that's going to look like. So here we have a whole over here that's cut up into or divided into tenths. And here we have a whole that's divided into hundredths. If I counted each of these little individual boxes, there would be 100 of them. If I counted each of these individual bars, there would be 10 of them in the whole. And that's how decimals are dealt with. There's always either out of tenths or out of hundredths. Okay? So, if I were to take something and color some of them in, right, I have just colored 3 bars in. So that would be 3/10. Okay? Now, how are we going to write that as a decimal? Well, a decimal, just like a fraction, is smaller than a whole. Okay? So when we do a decimal, we're not dealing with a whole right now. So there's 0 wholes, and the decimal is going to represent that it's smaller than 1 whole. Okay? And now what we do is we count that we have 1, 2, 3 bars colored in. So we're going to write that 1 spot behind the decimal. So 3/10 can look like 3/10. Okay, let's do another one. Okay, so now, again, we're still dealing with the whole that is in tenths, and we're going to deal with it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 bars colored in, so the fraction is 5/10. Now, how are we going to write that as a decimal? Again, just like in fractions, we don't have a whole number, because this is where the whole number would go if we're writing a mixed number. So, just like a whole number, we write a 0, because there are 0 wholes, because this is our whole, and there's nothing in there right now. It's not full. So we are dealing with 0 wholes, so then we put the decimal to know that we're talking about something smaller than 1. And since we colored in 5/10, that's how you write it. So 5/10 and 5/10 is exactly the same. And what I mean by that is you can write it either way, but in fraction form, this is 5 out of 10. In decimal form, this is 5 out of 10. And you say this 5/10, and you say this 5/10. Now that's because when we write place value, we have places for value, okay? And so like if we look at just regular place value, we have the ones place, the tens place, and the hundreds place. So if we have a number like 376, there are 3 hundreds, 7 tens, and 6 ones. So our number is 376. 376. All right? Now, if we're going to have fractions, we're going to have the same place values. So let's say we have the hundreds, the tens, and the ones. But we don't have a number that's 1 or bigger. We have a number that's smaller than 1. So we have to go back a place value. Now this is called the tenths. Okay, and it's spelled like this. Tenth. See, it's 10, but with a TH behind it. So this is the hundreds, the tens, the ones, and this are the tenths. Okay? Okay, so let's say that we have one whole. So that's what this 1 is supposed to be. We have 1. Alright, but I'm going to cut it up and get rid of some pieces. So let's say it's a pizza. And so I've taken my whole right here, or my one whole that should be in the ones place, and I'm going to cut it up into some pieces. So let's say we're going to cut it up into our 10 pieces. Okay? So if we count them, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay? So it's cut up into 10 pieces. And let's say I eat 4. So that means I have 6 remaining. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 6 pieces of pizza remaining out of my piece. So I don't have a whole pizza anymore, and I've cut it up into 10 pieces. So therefore, how many do I have left? I have 6 tenths. I have 0 wholes and 6 tenths. Okay? Now, it's the same thing when we're talking about hundredths. Okay, so here's our hundredths thing. It's the same size whole. Right? If I took this and dragged it over, it's the same size. Right? Same thing here. If I put this one on top, it's the same size, but I just cut it into more pieces. It's now 100. It's in 1/100ths. Okay, so if I colored in, let's say I colored in this many. Right? So that is 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I colored in 16 out of the 100. So that's 16 hundredths. Now, how do I write that as the decimal? Again, I don't have a whole, because this is my whole, and it's only part of a whole. So that means it's going to be 0, decimal, and then what number do I have here? 16 hundredths. And as you can see, it goes 2 place values. So 16, and then this is my tenths, and then this is my, what do we call this? 16 hundredths. Yep, this is my hundredths. So if we go over to the other page, to where we're talking about place value, we have our hundreds, our tens, our ones. Now we get to numbers smaller than 1. We have our tenths, and now we have our hundredths. And again, how you spell that is, I'll write it up top so I have room. Hundredths. So if we have our number that we were looking at back there, which was 16 hundredths, we have 0 wholes. Now the decimal represents a number smaller than 1, and we have 16 out of 100 colored in. So that's how you would write that, 16 hundredths. So again, if we have 100, and this time I'm only going to color in this many. So how many is that? It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I have 5 out of 100 colored in. So 5 hundredths. Now, how do I write that? So we've always had a 0 representing our wholes, then the decimal telling me that it's going to be smaller than 1, and I only have 5 colored in. Well, if I write my 5 here, that means that I have 5/10 colored in, which would be this much. Right? Do I have this much colored in right here? No, I do not. I have only 5 out of 100. So how do I write 5 out of 100 in decimal form? Well, what I have to do is I have to put a 0 right here, representing I have 0/10, because not a whole bar is colored in, because a whole bar would have to be colored in for a tenth, and I only have 5/100 colored in. So it would be 0 wholes, 0/10, and 5/100. Alright? Now I got one last thing to show you, and then we'll move on, and then we'll be done. So I want you to look at this. We have our hundredths and our tenths. What do you notice about this? Alright, right here I have 3/10 colored in, because this is my tenths place, and I have 1, 2, 3 bars colored in. Now, over here, I have 30, because each one of these is 10, if I counted them. So 10, 20, 30. I have 30 bars colored in. So that means I have 30 hundredths. So 0 wholes, and I have 30 hundredths. Now, I want you to look at these and tell me what they have in common. So if this are 3/10 and 30 hundredths colored in, what do they have in common? How are they alike? Right? What I want you to notice is that 3/10 is 3 bars up and down, and 30 hundredths is 3 full bars up and down. Just because these are cut into separate bars along the way to smaller pieces, it's still the exact same amount of the whole colored in. So 3/10 is exactly the same as 30 hundredths. Right? So that's the basic start of what decimals are.